is being recorded but not broadcast. That will make any difference to your input, I'm not sure, but I have to tell you that. Okay, do we have any apologies? None received. Any declarations of interest? Else?
I have a daughter who is a member of the scheme, contributing member.
I'm a member of the scheme.
Debbie?
Yes, I'm a member of the scheme.
Right. Okay, so we've dealt with that. The minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any matters of accuracy in those minutes? Yes, so can someone who was present please move those to true and fair record? And members content that we approve those minutes?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Right, pension fund update report. Joe.
Chair. So this is the standard quarterly paper, and there's just some key points that I'd like to highlight. So section 1 updates the board on any breaches that have occurred over the quarter, and the breaches over the last 12 months are attached in Appendix A. Please report there were no material breaches, and we didn't report anything to the pensions regulator. Section 3 updates the board on activity with Border to Coast and partner funds, and also gives the latest update on the Fit for the Future consultation, where I'm pleased to report that all 7 of the new partner funds that have come from Access have completed their governance requirements and will be joining Border to Coast. The last joint committee was held last week on the 24th of September. Wasn't last week, was not on the 24th of September. And paragraph 3.8 sets out the key points from that meeting. Next meeting is on the 25th of November, and if anyone has any questions that they would like the chair of the pensions committee to raise there, please email Councillor Condell or myself and I will pass them on. Section 4 provides members with an opportunity for any comments or questions on the papers brought to the pensions committee held in September and earlier today. And before I open to questions, just an additional update that's not in the paper. Since writing this, MHCLG have issued a new consultation entitled Scheme Improvements, Access and Protections. This came out on Monday. So this covers 4 areas, 3 of which are operational and have been expected for a while. So just briefly, these are the normal minimum pensions age. So they're aligning that, the LGPS regulations, to the minimum age set out within the Finance Act of 2022, which raises the age from 55 to 57 from the 6th of April 2028. There are, though, protections that will be in place, proposals for protections in place for anyone that was in the LGPS immediately before the 4th of November 2021. The second one is about academies in the LGPS. So this is formalising the approach for multi-academy trusts who have academies across different funds and different administering authorities to move to a single pension fund and removing that Secretary of State approval. And the last more operational one is on New Fair Deal. And this removes the admitted body or broadly comparable scheme requirements for contractors where employees transfer from a scheme employer. And instead, it's where scheme members will be treated as if they were still employees of the seeding employer for LGPS purposes via a deemed employer approach. So these are some regulations that were initially talked about in 2013, there were consultations in 2016 and again in 2019. So hopefully at some point these ones will actually go through. What it should do is reduce the administrative burden within funds of trying to sort out the admission agreements, getting them signed, avoid the risk of exit credits all payments at the end of the contracts, and will also reduce administration for the multi-academy trust as well, with having all of their academies in one fund. And what it should also do is over time reduce the number of employers across the LGPS, because obviously with academies and then outsourcing a contract for cleaning services or a contract for catering, the number of employers has just grown and grown over the last few years. So that should stop that increasing. And the final area, which is not so much operational, and you may have heard it was announced in the recent Labour Party conference, is they're looking to give LGPS pensions access to mayors and councillors, reinstating the access that finished in 2014. So that would be councillors in all principal local authorities and also for mayors and deputy mayors. There will be some areas that they won't be entitled to, so it won't be auto-enrolment. Councillors will have to select, not to opt in to be into the LGPS. Flexible retirement, early retirement through redundancy, non-reduced retirement through redundancy won't apply, and some other things. So one of the changes from the previous pre-2014 was that employers made the decision as to whether or not they would allow their councillors to join the LGPS. That won't be required. All councillors will be eligible to join if they choose to. So I will be taking a paper to our December Pensions Committee meeting. We'll be sharing some information about it if anyone is interested in more background in the weekly email. Deadline for our responses is the 22nd of December. So the fund will put in a response following the discussion at the next Pensions Committee. So that was all I was going to say on my report, and I'll happily take any questions. Thank you.
Questions, colleagues? Very far. One of the breaches in relation to late contributions is very, very late. Aspen's, that's 3 years or something. What action is being taken, and are you going to report them as an employer to the regulator, given how late they are?
Do you have I was just going to read what it says and see if there's more information on here. That otherwise, what I can do is I can take that away and find the detail behind it. Is that on the? Apologies, just trying to find it.
Most recent honourable contribution.
Oh, that tab, if I went to the most recent. Been in there in all of them. So it's Aspen's was due in May 25. It's not 3 years.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, sorry, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. There has been a lot of discussion with them about that. I would have to go and check into the detail behind that. It's a tiny contract. I think Aspen's is a cleaning or catering, so it'll be 1-2 people. So it's not material to the fund at all, and there has been ongoing dialogue with them. So what I will do, if the board are happy, I will follow that up and let you know the detail behind that.
Yeah, no,
the expectation was we wouldn't report it to the pensions regulator. I
don't think it's. I think it's using the regulator to enforce against the employer, because the employer is failing. Obviously very blatantly failing in their duty. And my concern would be that they're not, they are holding on to scheme members' money, not necessarily the employer contributions, but they are holding on to employee contributions that should have been paid over as well. And that's for a new contract. There's always a degree of latitude. I think
And
my patience might have been exhausted before yours, Joe. I think.
I think it has been that issue that hopefully this new fair deal will correct, because it is all about getting the admission agreement signed. They won't pay anything across. Obviously, we can't receive anything until an admission agreement is in place. So I think it has been that numerous times going back and forward, and I'm not sure if it's not come in since then. So we will,
if you could just let us
check
know
into that and share with the board.
The other thing I was going to raise on this report, and it was a question more for colleagues around the table, was clearly the expanding of border to coast is a significant thing. I can't think of a better word, but I declare an interest as someone who's involved in this with another pension fund. But does that expansion raise concerns for colleagues around the table?
Only from the point of view they've got the capability to manage the taking on that, whether or not there's, don't see any particular issues with them being able to do that.
Has it? I mean, I'm assuming it's been discussed. Yeah, I'm looking forward. I mean, it's how many of the funds are due? 5,
7.
7.
So there was a paper that was in the September committee papers that set out the whole transition plan, how these 7 were going to be brought in, what the capabilities, how they were going to be built, all that process behind that. So that was obviously shared with the board through the committee papers. So hopefully that provided some assurance of the work that was being done. But I'm happy to provide more information, or even just put some very brief stuff in the paper, but give a more verbal update of some of the work that's being done.
But I mean, they've already got, what you saying, I know I'm going to the committee meeting this morning, but they've all completed their governance, is it?
Yes.
Checks or whatever it is.
So basically the 21 orphan funds that came out of 2 pools of access that were told they were not able to continue as LGPS asset pools from the government in trying to consolidate and reduce the number of asset pools. So those 21 funds had a very short time period by 13th September to find new homes. So since that came out in March, April, May time, when the discussions first started, those funds have been working with the asset pools, with funds within asset pools, to try and find where the most suitable home was for them. So they've had a very difficult job, but the government, they have now all decided, bar 1, which is the Isle of Wight. The 7 are coming to border to coast, 7 are going to
six plus the Isle of Wight.
Potentially the Isle of Wight are going to LGPS Central, 6 are going to LPPI, and 1 is going to London CIV. So those decisions have been made, and government will have to give their approval at some point. Border to Coast have been working with government throughout all of this, though, and notified them in August of the expectation that 7 access funds would be coming to us, that we weren't looking for anyone else. And the governance processes within those funds has gone through. The governance process within Border to Coast, in that all the shareholders had to approve those 7 new entrants coming in. That's completed with unanimous support from shareholders. So it's now just the whole transition planning of how we bring in those funds, all those assets. Government's timetable is incredibly tight, expecting it to be done for 1st of April, which is not going to happen. The basic legal requirements will be there for the 1st of April. Transition plans are there, but it may take a number of years. But work is being done so that those assets can be under the under the management or the control of border to coast even before they go into border to coast vehicles as such.
I suppose my only question, I'm sort of now asking on the back of what George was mentioning, really. Are border to coast saying to you, Joe, that they can manage it, that transition? I mean, it's going from 11 and you're adding another 7. Can they deal with it?
So I think if we look back to the 2030 strategy, which we were discussing last summer, and got approved last summer, within that, it looked at the ability to bring in new partner funds and what capabilities would be required. So the planning was already starting before government said this had to happen. So Border to Coast haven't in isolation said, yeah, we'll take these 7 funds on and all will be lovely. They've worked really closely with the existing 11 partner funds across both the head of fund level, the section 151 level, the chair of the committee level, so through the joint committee, to work to look at what is required, how can it be done, what is an appropriate timetable. So some recruitment was already done prior to this, looking to build those capabilities through the 2030 strategy. There is still going to be more that has to be done. I think it's not a case of border to coast just doing it with the new partners. We've already started building those relationships as existing partner funds with the new partner funds about how do we want the culture to look going forward, what behaviours do we want to see, because it's a change not just for those new funds coming in, it is going to change the dynamic of the existing border to coast partnership. So there's been a lot of work done and there is a lot more work to do, but I think all the partner funds and border to coast and new partner funds are committed to doing it in a way that is most effective and efficient, rather than just, we need to meet those deadlines that we absolutely have to, but everything else will be explained as to what we're doing, what the transition plan is, to do it in the most effective and efficient way. So I don't think it's going to be a quick journey. I think government will probably be disappointed in how long some of these things take.
So it's not going to be
It will be April for the basic legals to be signed,
Right.
and those new partner funds to be within border to coast. Assets won't have fully transitioned, they will be under management of, but access itself is splitting in 2, so that's got to be broken up, the old pool. So there's an awful lot of work that has to be done, but I think there is the commitment across all 19 partners, if you include border to coast as a partner, to ensure that we work together to do it, to ensure it's the best outcome for everybody. It's probably the best assurance that I can give you. Oh, and we have an update on Aspen's hot off the press.
So just to give some context, we now have, they should have been paying contributions for quite some time. There are 10 members involved with the admission agreement, but we now have a signed admission agreement. We've got a signed pass-through agreement, and it was that pass-through agreement that took the time to get sorted. We've received from our actuary this morning the report to go out to the employer. So I would anticipate that within the next 6 weeks, we will receive the first sort of contributions from them, which will take back to the beginning of their admission.
Right, thank you. Okay, right. Can we agree that we will note the fund update? Thank you. Right. The Pensions Administration report, Matt. Who's online?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, I'm not there. Right, so this is the West Yorkshire report for the last period, 1st of April 25 to the 30th of June 25. And the first thing on the report, really, I think in your packs is page 28. It's to do with the key performance indicators. I think most of them passed, that they were acceptable, and I think broadly we are over our minimum standards, but there are some that didn't meet the targets. The top of the pile, death grant set up and death on deferred. Yeah, it is a concern because these are priority number 1, the most important things. We don't want beneficiaries dependent spouses, etc., to be financially hardshipped by cases that have been processed late. We don't think they were, by the way. The average time was about 10 to 12 days overdue, but there's not always a payment, and if there is, it's not always large. Having said that, more resources being put into the teams to make sure that we bring up the results over the coming period. There's 15 cases there across those two KPIs that didn't meet. We're putting senior pensions officers in. They are at a level that we'll be able to check the work once it's processed. We're also reviewing the process. I didn't explain it very well this morning, and committee thought that meant that we were going to review the target, which suggests we were watering it down. We're not reviewing the target. The target days remain the same. We're just going to ensure that the stages that we measure are still appropriate and our officers are actually using the process correctly, so we get an accurate measure. That's all that we're doing. And we are working with all our shared partners, including yourselves, so I know that you are aware of that. Deferred benefits into payment quote and the inter-fund linkings. There was a national standardisation, if you like, of KPIs on report and accounts. It moved from 35 days that we use to a national standard of 15, and we just not agile enough to up the speed of our processing. Further resources it has gone into that deferred benefits team, and the interlinkings, there is going to be some further training, but the results might be slightly skewed over this period anyway, because there was some annual benefit statement work so that we could get some of the work completed. We call them blocks and quarantines, but basically complete our processes and transactions so that we can get those annual benefit statements produced. And I expect both of those to be better in the next period as well. Interfund out actuals and interfund out quotes. Our software still isn't up to speed. We are performing two manual calculations, a standard calculation and a standard calculation for remedy. With the use of spreadsheets, it just slows the process down. We are working our way through them. It just takes a little bit longer. Monthly postings is cyclical, I'm afraid. At the end of year, employers will send us all their outstanding leaver notifications, etc., that they might not have sent us before. Obviously, valuation is important, so they need to make sure that the data is accurate. So there is a spike in work, and it generally takes a little bit longer in this period to process it. I expect that to return to normal as well. And transfers slower this period because there was some additional training. Staff weren't processing as many because they were training some new staff, so that just slowed them down a little bit. And then the last one, member update details. We were just shy on our 100% target, 99.08. I expect it to be there or thereabouts next period. Looking through the report, as I just scroll down, employer training, there's been quite a few sessions, sort of backs up my commentary about year-end returns and employers getting their work to us. It looks like a lot of the work to employers was about blocks and quarantines for annual benefit statements and the data we required, and that all thing that is relevant to our returns. Looking at on page 31, bottom of paragraph 4.2, IDRPs, stage 1 appeals against the fund. There's one here, a recovery of overpayment of pension due to re-employment, and the pension should have been abated. Now, this is quite an old case, and you'll see in the current position that it was reported back in February. The complaint has been partially upheld, and there has been a compensation payment made. But we have sent a letter out, and it was sent on the 1st of May 2025, just outside the timelines, but I think that's because of the additional work with the compensation that was awarded. Stage 1 appeal against the scheme employer. There is one there about the decision on leaving or the reason for leaving. It's on hold due to legal reasons. I'm not party to those, but I do believe the fund is aware. So if that's an issue, I don't know if Joe or someone would be able to add any info on that. Stage 2 appeals, nothing currently outstanding, which is really good. No old cases on there. Pensions Ombudsman case, these have been to the board several times now, just waiting on the Pension Ombudsman to make their final determination. But the first one, as of the 14th of March 22, was that the reason for leaving was not redundancy or business efficiency. So we've already fed back to the pension ombudsman that information, and we're waiting for them to respond again. And then the last one, dated the 6th of January 23, the employer's been quite clear about this ill health or potential ill health retirement, is that the member did not meet the criteria for ill health requirement, and we've provided that information to the pension officer also. So we're just waiting for that final determination on those. Paragraph 5, shared service update staffing. Well, hand in glove with those key performance indicators is recruitment and training. You can see here, second bullet point, 5 senior pension officers have been appointed. We've created 2 new senior pension officer posts in the team transfers and link-ins. We're also appointed 2 new member services managers, and this is the role that sits just underneath the management team. And it says here that there are no other vacancies. All I would say, the employee relations teams, we've just had a recent resignation, and Amy McHugh will be leaving by the end of the month off to pastures new, and we'll update further her replacement over the coming months. Looking through the finance update, I'd go to paragraph 5.5. The estimate issued in January was for a cost of £22.30 per head. At the moment, the forecast through some underspend is £1.36 less on that estimate. So we're currently forecasting £20.94 per head for this year. Shared service risk register at 5.9, we have updated a risk and a risk 11. We think that now, with the way our software is working and our capabilities to do manual calculations and our backup, which is every 24 hours, that if something did happen to the system and it wasn't available, it is probably more possible because of the changes to legislation, but the effect is critical rather than catastrophic, because we would be able to work, perfectly well using our own knowledge, manual calculations and spreadsheets. However, it is still a risk. Risk 16 is new, impact of new legislation and administration. I'll come on to that as we look at the consultation, the recent consultation by MHCLG. And then risk 17 was added as we close the temporary bank accounts, deposit accounts, and look to move those funds back into each respective fund within the shared service. It's not as simple as just saying, right, we've got a few £1,000, we'll just put it back in for you guys to invest. We have instructed HMRC in the past that these pensions were discharged. We need to work with HMRC as we say, no, actually they're not, and we need to move the money back. So with regards to those temporary bank accounts, paragraph 5.1, we have also employed a new tracing and mortality company to find anyone that's gone away, someone that's lost trace of us of them. Some of them, their pensions will be due. Some of them will have the money in the temporary bank accounts. We need to track them down and tell them the money is there for them to receive. So that's going very well. And I think the first requests for the gonaways went out last month. And pension dashboard at 5.11, just a quick update. There's not actually much change really on the dashboard. Our go live date is the 31st of October. We are on schedule for that. There may be a small delay. It's not of the making of the pension fund or us, your administrator. It's just that the pension dashboard program have now a queue of pension funds or pension schemes that they are onboarding, and it just could take a while to get to us to put us in. So there's nothing sinister, and we'll report on that as it goes through. And the only other commentary really on pensions dashboard is this is the go live date for us as the fund, and the data's got to be tested over the coming months to make sure that the data is okay, and our response time and our reactions to any inquiries is sufficient. The public will not go live for some months yet. DWP have promised a 6-month notice period. We don't know when that they'll issue that. Hasn't happened yet. So as far as I'm aware, it will be at least after April next year. We'll keep you updated as and when we hear from DWP. Moving through backlogs were mentioned this morning. We are working very hard towards reducing these. So this starts at area or paragraph 5.39. Across all partnerships, the backlogs, the older work is being reduced. We can see there at 5.39, numbers have reduced from 703 to 605. And Lincolnshire, we have reduced the number. Well, we've got the number is 185 outstanding as of September this year. Lincolnshire, the average. Oh, also, sorry, I was about to just jump ahead there. The automation is or partial automation is working really well, and we are still processing new cases of deferred benefits, and this includes recalculations as well in less than 30 seconds. So that's really good, and that will stop new backlogs accruing. Looking at the active processes, although across the shared service there is a slight increase, for Lincolnshire there is a slight decrease, and we can see in the table at 5.45 that since from January to June, those numbers have reduced by about 40%, which I think is really good as we look at those cases. And they are old cases. If I don't know if anyone can see the date there, but these are cases that we would have received prior to the 31st of March 24. So they're quite old, but we are getting through them. Branding. I know this is something dear to your hearts. Branding. There has been quite a few conversations over the last 6 months. We've highlighted some complex areas that maybe we didn't consider before, such as cybersecurity and the servers and domains, protecting our scheme member data. So we need to think about that, quite seriously on how that works with branding. But also, how do we change email addresses, or how do we make it obvious on bank accounts when we pay our pensioners that it's being paid by you rather than paid by us? So there's things that we can do there, and we need to assess how long that may take to make changes and what the cost might be when we do it and the work involved. But also there's a big unknown called local government reorganisation. So I think some action may not happen until we understand a bit more, we have further clarity around LGR. The recent consultation on changes to the local government pension scheme, called Access and Fairness Consultation, is introducing some changes to the scheme, some good ones that we've been after for a while. The ability to pay refunds to scheme members after a 5-year cut-off period, if you like. But also there's addressing survivor pensions and death grants and addressing gender pension gaps. It doesn't sound too dramatic, but this is going to be implemented retrospectively, and it will be implemented back to when legislation first introduced civil partnerships. My understanding is that this will be 2005, and it's for these sort of things that we've added that extra risk to the risk register, because the word from MHGLC, or the two words, is administrator burden. It's not a word that we particularly favour, but it just demonstrates that not only will this be additional work going forward, but it's going to be additional work going back as we reassess all those pensions and death grants that were paid, but they weren't dependents and beneficiary pensions or lump sums death grants paid. We'll need to find those people. If we know we are, that should be okay. We might not. So we need to back to that tracing company to see if we can find these retrospectively and then work out their benefits and pay them plus arrears and interest or whatever our regulations say. Annual benefit statements, a good story, I think, 5.53. Last year we sent out 99%, and this year, by the 31st of August, 99.4%. The reason it's not 100% is because there will be outstanding work on member records, and we won't send the statement out with that work incomplete, because it would mean that we're sending out a statement value that is not correct. So we wait for the work to be completed, and then we'll send the statement out a little bit later. We do communicate this with our members, so we think they're quite comfortable and they understand this. But 99.4% is a good score. and more than comparable against our competitors and other funds. Looking at data protection impact assessment, and this is going back to the dashboard. We have revised or reviewed our data protection impact assessment, and for us to be compliant with the rollout of the dashboard, we will need to update our privacy notices. I think we were probably aware of this, but we're just doing a bit of work on that now. And I think that seemed very quick on my behalf, so I hope that wasn't too rushed, but that's the end of my report. And are there any questions?
Colleagues?
Can I, sorry,
Yes, Dave.
sorry, Matt, I'm going to ask again. I think I've asked this a time or two of you, but still get a bit concerned about these ombudsman cases, these two that are in the ombudsman's inbox that have been there 3 years.
Yeah.
Do we collectively, do we remind the ombudsman, or does it, who keeps an eye on it all for them? Because it just seems to be continually, there's just seems to be a continual delay for them in getting a response. That was all. I know it's not us. I'm just wondering what we're going to do about it, or we can do about it.
I think when we raised this, and it might have been some time ago now, I can't remember if it was at the last autumn or it was this spring, winter, but I know you raised it, and we did contact the ombudsman just to sort of say, you know, how long can you get some of these out, etc. And I don't recall a response, but we did get a little flurry of activity across all of our cases, just sending us updates or further questions, and then it seemed to have gone dead again. But I think just for the purpose of the board here, or board members, whilst we as a pension fund and your administrators are under legislatory requirements to get these complaints, these IDRPs processed in very quick time, there is no constraint placed upon the ombudsman. They could do it the next day, they could do it 10 years later. And I don't know what's reasonable. I don't think there's anything written in legislation. I don't know if the chairman has got anything to suggest that.
There isn't, and with my other hat on, I'm dealing with cases with the ombudsman that are still outstanding that are older than that.
All right.
So it's a right mess. Use a technical term.
No, I mean, I raise it purely on the fact, Matt, that, I mean, I'm thinking from the members' point of view, I mean, I'm thinking it's not reasonable at all, is it? I mean, whether they get an answer they want, or, you know, the answer isn't into their, to their liking. It's just getting an answer, really, isn't it? They're hoping for.
I mean, the only thing that we could do is we could send another request to the PO just to say, could you give us an indication of when you'll look at our records? But I don't know if that is a useful, a good use of our time. I'm not sure. I'm happy to take direction and send another reminder. I personally think it might just fall on deaf ears.
I don't think you make any progress with that sort of reminder, unfortunately.
I mean, my issue is only that I don't want the scheme members to think that we're not got an eye on this. I mean, it's from a regulatory point of view, it just seems totally unreasonable to be waiting for this length of time for an answer to a complaint.
And if I can just add, I have recently been contacted by them, and with West Yorkshire as well, about one that they looked at, but that was actually newer than the two that we're still waiting on. So there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for what the delay is, but they are obviously doing some. But yeah, perhaps it might be at least to show that we're doing something. If the question gets asked, if you can just send a question again, is to give any idea, and happy for you to say that the pension board at Lincolnshire Pension Fund have requested
Right.
Throw the
Yeah.
weight of that behind it.
I'll give it my best shot for you, Joe.
Worth a try.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thank you. All I don't want is for anyone to come back to us as a collective and say, well, you've not looked after us. You know, that's
Yeah.
not that I can help really, but it was just to at least say we're trying. You know, we are aware. I'll leave it to you, Matt.
Yeah, no, I'll talk to technical, and I suppose that the reassuring bit here, I think, is that the member is now dealing directly with the pension ombudsman. So, if they are upset, you know, disgruntled, whatever, you know, let's hope that they are, you know, voicing that concern to the PO. With these cases, even the old ones, I'm not aware of any recent contact at all with the member. I mean, that doesn't make it right, obviously, but I'm sort of encouraged that they're not coming to us or to you directly to air their opinions and their, you know, because I'd be upset if I was waiting 3 years, to be honest with you. But let's just send something to the PO. It's proactive, and then if anything approaches us, we can say, well, we've tried, and we can sympathise with the situation that it's in. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, sorry,
Max.
Debbie. Yeah,
It's
I
okay.
was looking closely enough.
So I was just going to ask about the software issues, and is that common across software providers for pensions?
With regards to transfers and interfunds, in general, my understanding that all software providers are struggling because there's different types of transfers creating different types of benefits within the scheme. And the scheme has now become very complex because you've got a level of benefits paid now, and then you've got, with the remedy applies for the age discrimination, you've got a different way to calculate it based on different different pay or whatever it is. So I understand everybody has some significant issues. I think what concerns me is when I speak to software providers is that their suggestion is that the resolution won't be until the spring. And again, this is for all. Our provider is Civica. They've definitely said the spring. Their competitors have said it's within a 2-year plan. So just for a change, our provider is within the mix. I am part of the local government officer group, which is a national group that meets in Westminster, and we talk to the software providers every 3 months. The next one will be December, and we will be asking them again about transfers and interfunds. So it really isn't good. It's not even acceptable, but I can bring back some further information, perhaps in January's boards, just to update you. I think the only reassuring thing is when they're not outside of anybody else's, you know, capability and ambition.
Thank you.
I've got a couple, Matt. In terms of the changes, well, you've changed your targets to reflect the standards in the annual report guidance, which is fine in a sense, but those targets are more than 50% lower than your current target. So did you simply change the targets because that's what the annual report guidance says? Or was there a process that said, is this a reasonable target that we have any chance of achieving, given it's so different? And if it isn't, we will stick with an SLA of that, even if we have to report in the annual report against that target. Because my assumption would be that your performance against the 35-day target is broadly what it was previously.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think to some degree you're making a rod for your own back. I think, you know, we can argue about whether 35 days is reasonable or unreasonable, but you're now having to resource, presumably at the fund's expense, to make a 50% improvement in the timeliness of dealing with these cases.
Yes.
And that just seems to have happened without any process of, as far as we can see, without any process of approval or consultation about whether changing the SLA targets in that way is appropriate.
I mean, it is a fair point. I mean, the directive to change was communicated last year before we produced last year's report and accounts, and it was optional. As we looked at it and discussed it internally, we thought pretty much that was now mandated. However, when we looked across the suite of KPIs, many of them fell in our favour. Not by a lot, maybe a couple of days here, 5 days there, and we didn't feel that we could cherry pick one above the other. It's either we'd have to stick with our own measures and then feel that we were now out of step with arguably the rest of the LGPS, or at least a majority of it, as people adopt these new target days, or we go all in and then we make sure that we resource. So you are right, it is a cost to us. But I suppose the argument is that this is being suggested or is being mandated as an achievable figure. So maybe our resource where it wasn't where perhaps it should be, or where others across the country, like the Scheme Advisory Board and the LGA, thought the resource should be. So I think with an extra officer in there and the training that will go with it, I think these results will start to get better. But I think the point that's worth me taking back, if you're happy for me to do that, is that there probably wasn't a lot of discussion with you as partners about adopting this. There was just a lot of internal chat, and we felt that as they were our measures and our times, that it was appropriate for us to change them. But I think we should have discussed it with all our partners.
These are SLAs that affect scheme members.
Yeah.
So never mind whatever consultations taking place with Lincolnshire as a fund. There should have been some consultation with scheme members about whether these things are appropriate. Because this is your customer service charter in a way. So
I suppose it is. I'm not aware that we discussed or surveyed our scheme members about the key performance and the SLAs, and I'm not sure that they're aware of that they exist. I'm not aware of any fund that's surveyed them. I mean, you might have more information than me, but I'm not aware of any scheme member that's been surveyed over an SLA. It's a really interesting.
Not necessarily in a survey. Yeah. There are other ways of consulting scheme members than just doing a survey. But even if you don't do a survey for them, you will have documentation that says you can expect to see that your transfer will be sorted out within X days, because that's our performance standard. So you need. All of these things need to relate to each other. They need to be reflected in the Pensions Administration strategy statement for a start. Mm-hmm. And I'm not aware that that's been updated to reflect.
That comes in January.
Yeah.
So that it wouldn't
necessarily have got there yet. But,
yeah.
So I think what I would be suggesting is that you need to think about the process by which you get these things agreed and go through. So it's not that it's the wrong thing to do necessarily. It's about the way you get there, and the way you get there is as important as the end point.
Yeah, I mean, the point's taken, because as I was agreeing before, I think there should have been more discussion around it anyway. But back to my point, George, were these mandated by SIPFA from this year and Scheme Advisory?
You're mandated to report them.
Yeah,
you're not mandated to use them as your own performance targets.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think
you could choose to set different targets. My fund's targets for most of these are actually less currently than the standards that are set. Now, hands up, we are not achieving our own standards, so we're looking better on virtually everything, but. That's not relevant. These are things you should report against, and you can choose to monitor against them, and you can choose to use them for your own management purposes and your own SLAs. But it is up to you what your performance standard is. Well, it's up to Joe and you put into the shared service.
I think it would be very difficult just if we were sitting in a committee and we're going through the annual report saying, here it's 15 days and we're 70% meeting KPIs, when throughout the rest of the year they've reported their own and say we're 35, we're 100%. So personally, I would rather that we did the standard ones that are now expected across the LGPS, but that a plan has been in place to bring them into line. So perhaps whether it was a phased move or so. I can understand both sides.
What you're saying, Joe, is entirely logical. I think you need to have done that as a conscious process,
Yeah,
and I'm not sure.
Yes.
I'm not sure that you have done that as a conscious process. I think is my point.
No, I would agree with that. So I think that's the process that we've gone through internally. But as I said, and this is, and I know, Joe, you do, call us out for this from time to time. The discussions weren't really there as the shared service, as the partnership. But we are, as you know, we are working on this with you. So I would agree with the process. But I think when it comes to these, we are resourcing. So I think the good things will come is that we are going to resource to get these KPIs in these areas, so that they are improving and succeeding.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Nothing else on this one? Okay, colleagues, can we agree the recommendation, which I think is simply to note the contents of that report? With that? Yep. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you, Matt. Okay, moving on. Annual review of the risk register.
Yes, it is. Thank you. So this is the annual review of the fund's risk register and risk management policy. There haven't been any changes to the risk management policy since last year. That's attached at Appendix A to the report. The current risk register, which hopefully you've all got a hard copy of, because it's quite small in some places, that's attached to Appendix B. And we've updated that to reflect a review that we undertook with the Council's Principal Risk Officer in September. The objectives shown on the risk register have also been updated to reflect those set out within the fund's business plan. Paragraph 6 in the report sets out the risks across each area of governance, investments and funding, operational and people, with the assurance level and direction of travel, and highlights any new risks added or any that have been deleted. At our quarterly meetings, we do bring any areas of change or addition that the board identify. They will go back to the committee. The committee will be approving this risk register in January. The council is actually changing its risk reporting system over the coming year. So we have proposed inviting the Principal Risk Officer to this meeting next year to go through those changes. So we underwent quite a change last year when, and again this year, and it's trying to take out those things that are more business as usual and identify those that are actual real risks. So a lot of risks we just have to accept, and it is just part of managing the fund. So hopefully these are things that are more things that we can mitigate to a degree and have an element of control over. So I don't plan on going through each risk line by line, but happy to answer any questions.
I'll kick off. So, given all the regulatory changes that Matt mentioned, so we've got access and fairness, we've got the more recent. Is there a sort of specific risk around the ability of the admin provider to cope with all the workload flowing from that?
So we have within the operational risks, the failure of the administration system, so they're not performing its functions in accordance with the rate. So it's a very broad one, and kind of just covers them all. So kind of it's really. Within the the due to element in there. It does cover changes in regulatory requirements. So the more detailed risk is on the the shared service risk register that goes into more detail. So this is a higher level risk.
Sorry, Debbie, yes.
It's okay. I was just going to ask, it talks about the risk, the appetite for risk, but I couldn't see that statement anywhere, the risk appetite statement in the policy. I don't know whether that's something that's not in there or.
Yeah, we haven't actually, that's something that came in as what that work hasn't actually been done with the committee to this point, looking at their risk appetite. I know it was done with the council.
It's due to be done again though.
It's due to be done, yeah.
I think there's a recognition that having one risk appetite for everything we do was unrealistic. So
that will be part of what we can be looking at with the principal risk officer over the coming year, and perhaps bring that. We'll also be looking to bring some training to the committee on that, so to understand their risk appetite.
Okay, thank you.
You spotted the gap, Debbie. Well done. Yeah.
Thank you, George. Yeah, sorry. All I was going to ask, and I'm again looking at you, Jeremy, is cyber security,
Yes.
which is 02, is it 02? There's a fund specific document being drafted, did you say?
Being drafted, yes.
Is that going to change our approach as a Lincolnshire fund? I mean, a lot of it at the moment is wrapped around LCC or West Yorkshire. Is this going to be a different document altogether?
So,
or I mean, I'm aware. I mean, cyber security. I mean, you need to look this many days before somebody else has had an attack. But
so what we've done in the past is we've worked looking at West Yorkshire's cyber security, because they hold our key data really on the system, and also work within LCC's cyber security policy for other things. What we haven't had, and what came within TPO's general code, is to have a fund specific. So we won't actually be doing anything different per se than we do, but it's actually having a policy that sets it out and where those risks are and how they are managed. So it's just bringing it in together in a new policy that will be coming to the January board.
so
It's not a change, it's just documenting and pulling things together into one fund specific policy.
So at the moment, it's assessed as adequate.
In that the controls that are in place,
Right.
so forget that we don't have a fund policy.
No.
The controls that are in place at West Yorkshire as our administrators within the council for the systems we use theirs, I don't think will ever be substantial, because you can't be. It's as good as it can be, given it's a very changing environment. So we're saying kind of looking at the risks as opposed to the documentation we have around it as a fund. That's where the adequate comes in.
All I was trying to get to is that is the current assessment of risk ours, or is it West Yorkshire?
It's our assessment in what West Yorkshire are doing and what the council is doing.
So we're collectively, again, we're content with what's in place.
As content as we can be, given all the everything that's out there. So I think, was it last year West Yorkshire did a pretend breach? Was it last year, Matt? Yes, give me a nod. So, you know, through the Shared Service Collaboration Board, we will see when they've done things looking at what's their business continuity, what are their cyber policies. They had a pretend attack to see how would they cope with that. I think there were some external people brought in to do that. So, and obviously the council has its policies on cyber. And I think that's strengthened that area with, there's a new head of cyber.
Yes, new.
So it's being aware of what does the council do for those elements that we piggyback on off the council. What does West Yorkshire do on behalf of looking after our data, ensuring their systems are as safe as possible? and we are as content as we can be. So which is why it's only ever going to be adequate,
Yeah.
because it's something that, you know, the technology is just changing on a daily basis, the hacking is changing. So does that cover?
So really, the fund specific is purely to ensure we've got all the boxes ticked.
It is, but it's also actually useful to have it in one place, how we're looking at this as a fund, as opposed to, well, they're doing this and they're doing this, just something that actually brings it together. But yeah, it is, we've been told we should have one, we will create one, but we aren't adding any additional layers to that cyber security because there isn't really anything that we can do as a fund.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Yes. Are we content that risk register represents the position and the new recommendations that he wishes to make? Okay, thank you very much. Annual reports and accounts, which I presume is planned.
Thank you very much. So the report today brings the draft annual report, and the external auditors will also present their year-end report on the pension fund accounts audits. The recommendation is that the board consider and discuss the annual report and feedback from the external auditor in their report. Pension fund annual report for 2025 is attached at Appendix A, and the content and format of this document is in line with new guidance which has been issued by the Scheme Advisory Board. The report itself is an excellent document which gives information about all aspects of the fund's work during the last 12 months and is a great source of information for the board, the committee, and for any members of the public wanting to understand more about the pension fund. In terms of the accounts, paragraph 1.3 sets out changes that have been made to the accounts over the summer, and this relates exclusively to the valuation of unquoted assets, where the 31st of March valuations weren't available at the date we published the accounts originally. In totality, the value of these assets has increased by 3.9 million, and this adjustment has been made to the accounts which are in front of you today. I'm very happy to take any questions on the annual report before handing over to Paul and Mohammed, who will take you through their report, which is also attached to Appendix B.
On the annual report. As all these things are, extremely comprehensive. I couldn't find anything that didn't tick the box when I was going through my checklist. So, well done. Okay. Paul, can you quickly take us through?
Do a quick high level. So first of all, thank you to the finance team again for all the help on the audit. It's been great and been helped to be efficient on the audit. So turn to page 224 in your pack, which is the overall audit findings. So the first one there, the significant audit risk is management override controls. And this is where we assess how management can override kind of the accounting packages, journals, etc. There's just one comment here, which was the same one as last year, which is detailed further in page 22 of our report. It's just around segregation of duties over journals. And we know this is down to the way the system is configured, but this is where someone can input a journal without it being authorised prior to being in process. And we know there's compensating controls because Claire and the team then have looked at it afterwards and they can make sure it's correct. We just need to report to you as auditors this deficiency, which we're classing as a minor deficiency. Also on page 4, the key accounting estimates there. First one is evaluation of the level 1 and 2 pooled investment vehicles and segregated investments. There's no issues there to report. We're happy with the evaluation of the investments. The second one is evaluation of level 3 pooled investment vehicles. And again, we're happy with those evaluations. And the final one is the actuarial evaluation, which we reviewed and we found it is appropriate. At the date of this report, which was 2 weeks ago, the outstanding matters were there on the right-hand side. We've now finished our work on the level 3 investments. So all that is left is just the final work on the journals and then signing the rep letter and the audit report. you want us to go through the other pages or should just the key?
No, I've kind of picked up a question. So
Yeah.
just in terms of the timeline for those final pieces of work, what's that like?
The journals is being done in the next 2 weeks. And then obviously we then sign the accounts once the council sign their accounts, which I think is aiming
We
in
wait for
December.
us. So I think Rash is aiming for the end of the calendar year,
Yes.
Before,
Which
before Christmas.
which is in front of the backstop date that's.
it's in front of the backstop date, but behind the deadline for pension fund annual reports. Which
So we will publish ours without the
without a certificate. Yeah.
external opinion, as we have done for the past few years.
Okay. Any particular questions, colleagues, have got? Okay.
Just to provide some reassurance around that timeline, I think Rash is probably at audit committee a few weeks for November. But we've had a meeting with him this week and there aren't there's nothing to suggest that timeline would be revised.
Until we find some new accounting
Until
standard that
something's-
no one's thought about, yeah. Okay, right. Are we happy to, I think, are we asked to note this or
Yes.
to consider, or we've considered it. We've found it that it represents the fund as we know it, which I think is essentially what the auditors will be asked to talk about in their consistency opinion on the annual report. So, yeah, okay, thank you very much.
And apologies for leaving now, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, do we want to move on to the item after next and then come back when Claire as well?
At 1 minute past 4, I said, would you like to come through in 5 minutes? It's now 6 minutes past 4. So I'm hoping that door is going to open at any moment.
Thank you. Thanks, thank you.
Just 5 minutes past, so I don't. She would have been typing.
She will do thanks.
She's not far away.
She's literally. So she should be on her way. So it's up to you if you'd like to move.
What should we deal with the work programme,
Next one.
etc. Because I'm conscious that
I don't both here to talk about audit stuff, but if you want to pick anything up with her about risk, it's an opportune time, just say, because obviously that sits in her remit, doesn't it? There's a follow on for the risk item. Not saying you have to, but I'm just saying she's here if you want to ask her.
yeah, yes. I need notice of that question.
And she went back before it either. So.
Do you want me to pick up item 10?
Yeah, we move to item 10
Yeah, that's great.
to address the work programme.
Yeah, so
Who's in control of this enormous bundle of papers?
Yeah. So this is your normal opportunity to discuss training needs and provide feedback on any recent training that's been attended. At paragraph 1.4, we've included a table of progress for the mandatory training for the board to complete. You can see that all members of the board have completed that initial induction training and that new members of the board have got 12 months to complete LOLA, and that this must be refreshed with we're saying every 2 years of membership of the board. So that just captures for each one of you progress to date and timings for when either the training needs to be completed or the refresh needs to be completed. And if anybody's having any trouble with any of that, then please be in touch with me or Josh or John, and they will be able to offer assistance with getting you online and getting the training started. Each element of the board's meetings has a part dedicated to training, and you're asked to consider if there's any further training needs that you would like adding into the work plan for future meetings, and if there's any feedback from any training that you've attended more recently. And I will stop talking and hand over to you if there's any training that you want to report back on, or if there's anything that you would like me to add before we look at the work plan in a little bit more detail.
Well, all I would say, Claire, is I've been on the Highlands webcams of late, so I think since the last meeting I've been on 3, I think, unravelling initial results and early insights. The role of the pension board, I did that one. I did, if I may say, and I've got to be honest, I did struggle with this last one, which not for any reason of that, but it was the accounting disclosures and understanding your results. And what I found quite surprising was that you can have a surplus, which eventually ends up as a liability. I was trying to get my head around that bit for a while, where you've got more money than you need, but after you've decided what you're going to do with it, it becomes a liability.
I think the presentation was around the accounting reports and the asset ceilings that are in there, and how the accounting standards require any surplus to be dealt with. It's purely from, I suppose the two valuations are really quite different. So the valuation that's done as part of the triennial review will give that ongoing picture to set those contribution rates. The accounting reports are largely based on the accounting standards, and they are a snapshot at a point in time, but they require very specific assumptions to be used, like a very different discount rate to the one that we might use in for our valuation. I don't actually know why I'm talking about this, because Kelly and Matt are probably far more experts at this than me, but it's purely about making those disclosures in employers' accounts and how that might look.
It was quite an odd sort of presentation, part of it, in terms of it all seemed to go back to front in some respects.
And it may have been targeted more at employers who were looking at inventory rates rather than as a member of.
I only make mention of that when it came to my self-assessment at the end, I was pretty tight which way I was going on that. But that's what I've done in the last 3 months.
Anyone else?
I've done the effective decision making of the webinar.
Oh,
I did the live session, which was better than the previous live session.
is that the role of pension
Yeah.
board? Anybody else?
I registered and I couldn't get into it on the day for some reason. I don't know if it's a firewall within our system, but I need to go back to IT and resolve that.
I mean, if you've registered, you'll be available as a sort of on-demand thing, so
Yeah.
you will be able to.
I think it was on Zoom, so
Yeah, it could well be different new laptop, so I will get some help.
Right.
And Vicky, as well as yourself, George, you also went to the Border to Coast conference
Yes.
in September
Yeah.
as well.
Was as usual full of interesting stuff, really good presentations. Not the one that I was involved in. Most of the others.
I could say the same about what I was involved in. So.
I've got to say, I haven't been before. I think that all the stuff around the local investments now, they made that a bit more real. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, well, don't get me started on that. That's one of my things. Right. Okay, there's nothing else on that. We know the work plan for the next few meetings.
The content with the work plan as it stands, I think in January, you were hoping to do a review with the board.
Yes, we need to have a discussion, but
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, we'll bring something back then in January so that we can start moving that forwards.
Yeah. Okay, right. Claire, welcome. Audit assurance. How are we doing this? Is it a double act? Or?
So there's really nothing for me to say, so I'll just come straight over to Claire. You have the report within your pack, and Claire can just explain what they do in gaining assurance on the management of the pension fund, because we do have quite a few new members here.
okay. So thank you, Jo. So this is an assurance report, which gives an independent review of the first and second line assurances that are in place for the board's consideration. An independent assessment programme of administrative processes and procedures is undertaken by Bradford Metropolitan District Council, which provides that additional third line support for you as a board. Within the report, I pulled together different levels and areas of assurance from the work that we've delivered and from the work that's delivered by other providers. Page 251 in the pack contains details of the internal audit risk-based work that's been carried out by the internal audit team, and how we use our reliance from other providers is also included within that section. Pages 252 and 253 share the internal audit activity, and that's taken place from April 24 to now. And it just reports to you the areas that there are relevance in the internal control framework that we've looked at. There's also details on page 255, which provide details from the assurances from the external auditors that go through the audit committee as well to give you that assurance. The annual governance statement includes an assessment of council-wide governance processes, which is measured against the sit for good governance principles and framework. And that includes a review of pension governance as well, which forms part of that formal review. And last year's AGS did not identify any areas of improvement related to pension governance practices. I'm very happy to take any questions about anything that's in the report or any specific areas you would like any further clarity on.
Like you were about to say something, Vicky. I mean, it does seem to be a reasonably clean bill of health, which is great. That's fine. I'm just wondering, Claire, in terms of the testing around business world, is the sampling structured to pick up at least one pension fund transaction in each sample batch, or is it just entirely random? And it would be an act of God if we got a pension fund transaction.
Absolutely not. We actually pick up 10% of the sample that's always pension based.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that we don't, because we do that to make sure that we are doing a proportionate sample for pension, but it's not all pension heavy.
No,
but I would hate to sit in front of you, share the detail of testing and then say, actually, it's
that's helpful, because it does mean that we know when you're telling us that, you know, business world payment accounts payable is working fine, that it's working fine for the pension fund, the tested pension fund transactions as part of that. So that's the sort of assurance that we're needing.
And when we did the payroll audit, we increased that sample size. So every piece of the sample that we tested, we made sure we tested pension contributions of that sample, regardless of whether we were looking at pensions or we're looking at other aspects. We pulled everything back to pensions for the full sample size, which was, I think from memory, 22% of the payroll sample.
For the payroll sample, sorry.
Yeah,
Right.
Not the whole thing. It's still there now.
If the sample was 22% of the LCC payroll, that's
Going some.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it is really useful to have this as part of our overall role in gaining assurance about the operation of the fund. And I think it just, even if there aren't a lot of questions, it's an important part of the overall assurance gathering process. So when we get to the stage where the accounts of the fund are separated from those of the county council and there's some sort of separate governance statement, whoever it is that's signing it at that point has got assurance specifically in relation to the pension fund and some evidence base that they can use for completing that governance statement. So I think it's something where I think now the Lincolnshire Fund is probably ahead of many other funds that are integrated within a council by having something of this sort. So I think it represents a significant step forward. So thank you very much. Are you happy to note that, colleagues? Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Sorry to thank you, Albert. Right. Yeah. Unless you really want to know about the valuation of the pension fund.
I'm politely saying everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Matt, over to you. Valuation results.
Presentation. So the 2025 valuation is underway at the moment. So today we'll just take you through the process that we've followed as part of that. It's a particular focus on the methods and assumptions that we've used. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. We'll start off by looking at what's happened over the last 3 years since the 2022 valuation. Then we can discuss the assumptions that we're proposing or have been used and will be used for this valuation. We can then take you through briefly the headline results based on those assumptions. And then we'll finish off by looking at the key updates to the funding strategy statement. So a brief summary of that. Next slide, please. And again, thank you. So in terms of what's happened over the last 3 years, investment returns have been better than expected. That's not been the case in every LGPS fund. So that means we're off to a good start. That's helped to reduce costs. Inflation, there's been a very high period of inflation over recent years, as you'll know, and that has a direct impact on the pension increase awards. So in year one, there was a 10.1% pension increase awarded, and then 6.7% in the second year. So that's a lot of extra costs, a lot of extra money that the fund needs to find, which in isolation increases liabilities. However, it's worth taking into account the fact that we kind of knew that period of high inflation was going to happen at the time of the last valuation. So we did factor it in the long-term assumption for inflation. And now we've come through the worst of that high inflation. We can factor in a bit less going forward. So there's a kind of a neutralizing effect there, that the positive outlook for inflation going forward, at least relative to 3 years ago, it broadly offsets the actual costs of those pension increase awards. This valuation as well, we've refined our view of the discount rate. So the discount rate is the assumed rate of future investment return on the fund's assets. Discount rate is now assumed to be higher than 3 years ago. So the impact of that is to reduce liabilities, because we think we're going to get higher returns in future, then the fund can hold less assets today. It's worth remembering, though, that the discount rate is just an assumption. It doesn't affect the actual cost of the benefits, it doesn't affect the benefits that have built up so far or will do in the future. So the next slide summarises the investment returns that have been achieved the last 3 years. As I say, these have been better than expected. So an annualised return of 4.3%. The assumption we made back in 2022 was a long-term return of 4.0%. So actual returns better than assumed. That improves the funding position and helps to reduce costs. Next slide, please. So by the cost of the LGPS, the cost of the scheme, we mean the benefits that are getting paid out and the expenses that get paid out of the fund. Those costs are met through a combination of the contributions that we get in from employers and employees, and also the investment returns from the fund's assets. So there's a balance between contributions paid today and investment returns in the future. If we set contributions too low, that could be risky, because it means we're perhaps putting too much reliance on those future investment returns. So we need to get that balance right and strike an appropriate balance that works for employers, but also works for the fund in terms of making sure there's enough assets there to pay benefits as they fall due. Next slide, please. So yeah, so it's worth remembering that the funding valuation, it doesn't actually affect cost of the benefits. It's not possible to know what the benefits will cost unless the scheme closed and the last benefit payment is made. We don't know what that's going to be. We can only make estimates. So on one side, we make estimates about what the future benefits would be paid out of the fund. And on the other side, we make an estimate about what the future investment returns will be. And the kind of difference or the balancing item is then the contributions that employers need to pay into the fund. And so that's one of the objectives of valuation, is to set contributions for each employer over the next 3 years. There's a lot of debate in the moment in the LGPS about what appropriate contribution rate should be. Indeed, a committee today. Is it too high? Is it too low? There's not a single right answer to that question, because we just don't know what the benefits will end up costing. We can only make estimates. So it's essentially a budgeting exercise that affects the pace of funding. And valuation gives an opportunity to look back and review how things are going, take account of the latest indicators to inform our thinking going forward. The next slide. In terms of calculating liabilities, what happens is that the funds administrators send us member data covering every member in the fund. So that's current members that are accruing benefits, as well as former employees that have left, or pensioners that are currently receiving their pension payments today. That data covers all the benefit entitlements that members have. So what the valuation does is project out over each of the next 100 years for every member in the fund, every possible benefit payment you think might get paid. So a lot of assumptions in that. It's never going to be right. Again, it's a budgeting exercise. A lot of probabilities going on in the background. So the likelihood of these benefits getting paid, how long they might be paid for. These are all things we need to make assumptions around. But if you add up the monetary value of these cash flows, you get to a figure of around about £9 billion. So that's essentially the cash that would be needed today to pay all the benefits that have built up so far, assuming no investment returns going forward. So the next step is then to consider the impact of those investment returns, which is what the next slide is showing us. You can see a very big difference in the chart there. Everything kind of shrinks. And that's because we've got investment returns that we can rely on going forward. So actuaries talk a lot about discounting. We discount these cash flows back to today using a discount rate, which is the assumption for future investment returns. It's a bit back to front. It's easier to think about it from today. So what pot of money do we need today such that those future investment returns will grow that pot of assets to that £9 billion that we will eventually need to be paid out. And when we do that, we get to a figure of £3 billion. So that's the value placed on the liabilities that we then compare with the assets, and any difference leads to a surplus or deficit. So as I say, very big difference there, and that demonstrates how important these assumptions are. So I can take you through more about that next, in the next slide. Thanks. So the assumptions we make can be broadly split into two categories. You've got financial assumptions, so the investment returns, inflation, that kind of thing. And these are the assumptions that help us to estimate the amount of the benefits that we need to fund for. It doesn't tell us about when they'll be paid. The demographic assumptions is what tells us about the timing of those payments. So, for example, how long members will live for, and therefore how many pension payments we need to fund for each member. So that's all about the likelihood of the pension payments coming into effect, the likelihood of benefits getting paid in any given year in the future. Next slide. So the key financial assumptions then, the discount rate, which I've mentioned, inflation. So the rate of inflation in September every year then informs the rate that benefits get updated by the following April. So September rate was 3.8%. So that's very likely going to be the pension increase order that gets laid out in legislation. So we do need to make an assumption about that, not just this year, obviously, but next year, over long term. So we need a long term assumption for CPI. And then there's salary increases. So there's some members in the fund that have previously built up benefits under the old final salary schemes. And the rules of those schemes are that their benefits are linked to whatever their salary is at retirement. So we need an assumption about what salary growth might be going forward. But it's becoming less important nowadays. It's more and more the benefits building up in the career average to get revalued in line with inflation rather than salary growth. Next slide, thanks. So the discount rate is one of the most important assumptions we have to make. And as I say, it's the assumed rate of future investment returns on the fund's assets. So to form an assumption for that, the natural place to start is the actual investment strategy of the fund. We have a look at that. We do some analysis and we calculate an expected return on those assets. We're then required to be prudent. So what we do is we slice a bit off that expected return. The effect of that is to create a buffer. So that means we've got a bit more headroom just in case the future doesn't go as well as we hope. This slide sets out some of the risks that the fund needs to kind of navigate over the long term. There's no guarantee about investment returns going forward. Quite possibly could go through another period of really high inflation. We don't know. So these are the sort of risks we need to take account of and make sure there's a bit of caution when we're making these kind of assumptions. How do you do that? Well, it's difficult. There's a lot of judgment involved. So at this valuation, we've tried to put a bit more science behind it just to inform that decision. So that's where this prudence gauge comes in. Quite complicated, but what we've done is simulated many thousands of economic scenarios that the fund may find itself in future. And on each of those scenarios has got a different path for certain key variables like inflation, interest rates, lots of other things, investment returns. So we use that analysis, that distribution, which explicitly acknowledges the fact the future is not certain. So when we do that modelling, what we found is that under 72% of those scenarios, the fund has returned, could be expected to return investment returns that are higher than what we're assuming today. So that's indicating there's a moderate level of prudence in the assumptions we're setting. So that is encouraging. If we go on to the next slide, then just to summarise, we start with the expected return on assets. We calculated that to be 6.2%. That's based on lots of market data analysis and a bit of judgment here and there. We then knock off this allowance for prudence, so that's the kind of the buffer that's in place. And then we get to a discount rate of 4.7%. So yeah, the assumption for investment returns over the long term is 0.7% higher at this valuation. So as I say, it's a lower value on the liabilities. Next slide. So the demographic assumptions, these are the most important ones. Mortality is probably the most critical one. So if you imagine a stream of benefit payments for each member in the future, that tells us when those benefit payments will stop. Retirement age, another key demographic assumption, that tells us when the benefit payments will start. And therefore, together, that tells you how many years of pension payments the fund needs to fund for in advance. Other assumptions here, commutation. So the amount of pension that members might exchange for cash when they retire. Rules of the scheme are that you can give up pension, £1 of pension to get £12 of cash up to certain limits. So we do take that into account because it determines the profile of future benefit payments, how much is going to be taken as a lump sum in that first year of retirement versus annual pension payments going forward for life. And then with withdrawal, so that's the rate at which employees leave the workforce, because obviously at that point, members will start building up future benefits. And so we take that into account in our calculations as well. When it comes to setting these assumptions, our approach is to look at actual experience over recent years. And if that experience differs from what we assumed at the last valuation, we might tweak those assumptions going forward so it's more representative of what's been seen. So every one of these assumptions does have an analysis sitting behind it based on actual data that we've seen. On to the next slide, please. So let's say mortality is the big one here. And at Barnet Waddingham, we've got a specialist longevity team. And over recent months, what they've been doing is looking at the mortality rates for members of the fund. And based on that analysis, what they can do is calculate life expectancies. So how long will members live to receive those pension payments, and therefore how much do we need in the pot today? The other point to note is that that life expectancy assumption has to be appropriate, not just today, but over the long term. So the general trend is that life expectancies tend to increase over time. We refer to those as mortality improvements. So the longevity team will project those going forward. And there's a bit of judgment involved. So if we go to the next slide, we can see what their recommendations are. That third column there, that shows you that life expectancies, we're assuming, have increased. So based on the actual data, again, that's been experienced, at this valuation, we expect members will live a bit longer than what we thought 3 years ago. So that's obviously very good news for members, but from the fund's perspective, we need a bit more money in the pot essentially to fund those pension payments being paid for longer. So think back to that chart of the kind of the tail, it sort of pushes it out a little bit. Not by much though. It does increase the liabilities as you'd expect. Therefore, also the contributions that we need to ask employers to pay. But that's in isolation. I've mentioned a lot of other factors as well. So I'll hand over to Kelly to cover the initial results briefly and also the funding strategy statement.
And next slide, please. So we did take the committee through these results in a bit more detail, but I'll just touch on the headlines. So at the last valuation, that is bar graphs on the right, I can actually see it better from this screen. We're 101% funded and there was a surplus of 20 million. And on the left hand side here is the 2025 valuation position at whole fund level. So the whole fund is now 110% funded and surplus has increased to 330 million. Go on to the next slide, please. Don't think I'll actually cover too much of this in detail. This, if you want to have a look at it in the handout, this basically goes through all of the reasons why the surplus has increased and the funding level has increased. The green bars are the increases and the red bars are obviously the decreases. The main things to point out here are just the change in market conditions between 2022 valuation, 2025 valuation, which have been favourable for the fund. So that's increased the funding level. And the large red bar in the middle there is the pension increase experience, which Matt spoke about earlier. It's been higher than we had anticipated and higher than our long-term assumptions. So that has had a negative effect and has offset the surplus. So just go on to the next slide, please. We've just put a chart in here just to show this. Chart shows the funding levels of our BW funds, or most of our BW funds, the ones that we had the information available for, and we've just kind of shown the Lincolnshire Pension Fund in comparison to the different funds. So as you can see, most are increasing their funding levels, but there are some that have actually decreased fund levels at a whole fund level, and they are in a slightly worse position than they would have been at the 2022 valuation. Moving on to the next slide, please. Setting the contribution rates. This is one of the main purposes of the valuation. The total contribution rate is made up of the primary rate and the secondary rate.
So the primary rate is the employer's share of costs of the new benefits that are being accrued. So that is future looking, and it's based on the membership profile of the employers. If the employers are within a pool, then it will be looking at the membership at pool level. And it's normally a percentage of payroll that will be paid. And then the second part of the total contribution rate is the secondary rate. And the secondary rate is an adjustment to the primary rate, and that is dependent on whether each of these employers are in surplus or if they're in deficit. And again, this could be at pool level if the employers participate within a funded pool. So this will be agreed over a certain period, which will be outlined in the funding strategy statement. And if it's a deficit, it can be paid in monetary amounts from the employers back to the fund, or if the employers are within surplus, and it could come through at a negative secondary rate. So it will reduce the total rate that the employers are being certified to pay. And these will all be in the rates and adjustment certificate, which will be part of the valuation report, which will be issuing in March next year. However, draft initial results will be going out to employers within the next month for them to have a look at and discuss with us at employer surgeries. Move on to the next slide, please. So the primary rate, this is at fund level. So this is for the whole fund, and looking at the big picture, may be different for different employers. We've still to issue results for employer level. But the primary rate, 2025 is on the left, and the previous valuation 2022 is on the right in the table. And the future service rate has decreased from 30% down to 24%. We also look at the member contribution rates. As you know, the members contribute into the scheme as well. These have stayed generally constant. And so overall, the effect is that the primary rate has reduced at whole fund level from 24% down to 17.9%. So yeah, there's a drop there, and we are seeing that across most of our funds. That is across the LGPS landscape. So go on to the next slide. Again, this is just a reconciliation of the position. So the two main factors here are the changes in the market conditions and the changes in the financial assumptions that Matt had just spoke through. They're the two main reasons that the primary rate has now lowered in comparison to the 2022 valuation. And on the next slide, again, we've just showed a chart which the kind of blue colours, 2022 primary rate versus 2025 in pink. And this is, again, our funds that we advise. Generally, the consensus is that the primary rates have dropped quite significantly over the 3-year period. In Lincolnshire, again, towards the higher end, but they are within the pack. Yeah, if we move on to the next slide, please. So these slides are all in the funding strategy statement. So we have provided the committee this morning with full training that the board received this afternoon. So we have been through these slides. Do you want me to? No.
We through them.
Yeah. So yeah, same training. They received the same training as you did this morning. There's new guidance that came out early this year. It makes the funding strategy statement more aligned between funds, and the main aim is for employers to understand and be able to see that they're being treated fairly and understand how their contributions are set. We go on to the next slide. These just detail what we did covered in the training this morning. So it's just everything is in the funding strategy statement when it comes to the funding valuations. The funding assumptions will be in there, level of prudence, the different employer groups that we spoke about this morning with the committee and with yourselves this afternoon. And there's also how we calculate the contribution rates and exit valuations is all within the funding strategy statement. Go to the next slide, please. And again, we covered this in full detail with the committee this morning and with yourselves this afternoon. Different considerations that are within the funding strategy statement that the fund consider as part of the actuarial valuation and the intervaluation period. So yeah, there's pooling, ill health and death in service, managing those surpluses and deficits when it comes to the valuation and setting contribution rates. And the funding strategy statement essentially just brings all of those policies together into the one document that the employers can look at and hopefully understand. and went through again this morning, but this is just the proposed engagement plan, so I won't go through it again. But this just sets out all the important dates which are upcoming before the end of the valuation year, which will be 31st of March, when we'll issue all of the results and the funding strategy statement will be finalised. Thanks. Take any questions if there is any.
Right. It's questions.
Question about going back to the proposed mortality assumptions. Based on the government's declared intention of increasing the state pension age incrementally over time, is that going to be adjusted? Are they going to use a different benchmark ultimately and change it from the assumption of somebody retiring at 65 and push it to 67 and then on as time goes by? So it will I mean, the only reason I ask is because in my head it would materially change the life expectancy that they would be expected to draw on the pension fund.
Yes, so the figures we've shown in the pack those are illustrative at certain ages. We do take into account the actual legislation and the expected changes to state pension age in the future. That is reflected in the valuation for each member. For every member, we look at the legislation and make an assumption for when they'll retire and take their benefits. So that is factored in.
Oh, sorry, Jim.
Yes, go on, Dave.
I was only going to ask, I was just talking about the prudence adjustment. With Lincolnshire's, we're at 1.5, or we've agreed 1.5. Is it an agreement, or is 1.5 a standard, or could it be 2%, or how variable could that be?
There's a lot of judgment involved in it. There's not a single right answer to that. Part reflects the fund's risk appetite, how much risk we want to take on. Never mind the objective, making sure solvency. But part of the reason we did the modelling, that extra prudence gauge part, was to recognise the fact that it's not a clear-cut decision there.
Matt, without asking you to give away any actuarial secrets, what's the sort of range of the prudence adjustment across your client base?
So the Lincolnshire Fund is towards the higher end of the range. That was the case at the last valuation too. But it is, at this valuation, it is much closer to what we're seeing for the other funds. So it's much more closer to the pack, but towards the higher end. I think that's a good position to be in.
And just to Barnett's, our actuary will discuss that with us. So Claire and I went down and had a meeting with them to go through this before it was in a position to be brought to the committee and board. So with the recommendations, suggestions, and that understanding as to, well, we're reducing it from 1.8 to 1.5. Does that make sense? And that new prudency gauge, I think, helps to show what's the likelihood of that you still having enough going forward. So I think that's a really useful additional tool now that we have. But it's very much a discussion between officers and the actuary to find something that we feel comfortable with, and we think, knowing the committee, what they will feel comfortable with and the level of prudence that they might want to see.
Can I just take it one level further? If we move forward to your discussions with the employers, you've already agreed the prudency level with the actuary. So you know what you're taking to discuss with the scheme employers. And I pick up only in the committee there was a comment about stability and not having the next valuation and suddenly I think back up again. So that's what this is trying to manage. Is it the smooth, well, not smoothing, but a more, we don't want up and down, we want a nice sort of future sustainability of
And
rents.
I think it's as we've moved from, if you think, not that many valuations ago, we were in a deficit position.
Yeah.
So it's about, we've got into a surplus position, so we are comfortably funded. We're not one of these funds that's 200% funded that has very different issues, and we're not one that's 80% funded. So it's about what, and we've had discussions with the actuary about what might that long-term primary rate look like, what might that long-term total rate look like in a stable period. So it's trying to get to something. I think potentially we could, if we continue as we are, we could potentially come down a little bit more. I wouldn't want to be down at 10%, I don't think. I think if you go back to the origins of the LGPS, it was 1/3 for employees and 2/3 for employers, and that's moved
Six and 12.
yeah, moved considerably over time. So it's about what is something that's reasonable, so we don't get those huge fluctuations up and down for employers, because that's the last thing that they want. They want a reasonable, affordable rate, and affordability is a big discussion point anyway, but something that isn't going to be really volatile from 1 3-year period to the next. So I think we had historically had quite a higher primary rate than other funds. We have always been generally quite prudent, and we rein that back in a bit here. So we're still probably on the more prudent than most.
Yeah.
But I think we still feel comfortable. We're not huge outliers. We're kind of within the band of rates now.
I was only looking across the graph. I know it doesn't name funds, it just talks about or shows number of funds here or there. And there's quite a range, isn't there, from where they were to where they may be going. But I just wanted to have an understanding how the prudency worked.
And I think that change in funding rate is reasonably similar across a lot of funds, that with kind of a 6% drop.
Yeah, there's a degree of commonality in that.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things it might, if I was an employer, I might be saying to you, well, I get that. I get that you've got this 72% chance probability of success is the other way of expressing your that gauge. Well, the converse of that, which isn't the mathematical inverse, is, well, what's the risk or what's the probability that my rates will go up in 3 years' time? Now, based on what I've seen of other valuation methodologies and where you've come out, my guess is, and it is only a guess, that if you were to do that maths, you'd come out with a number that would be broadly acceptable to people. I think that's it is a metric that some other actuaries provide, and I'm not pushing their product, but I think if I was an employer, the question I'd be asking you is, what's the chance of it going up next time? And I think maybe that's a question that the officers would like to think about how they would answer it.
I do think there's also a danger, though, in people then believing.
Yeah, well, we should never believe any of the numbers in this. Sorry, guys.
Because it is all a finger in the air, and let's hope. And if we have 3 years of really negative markets, then all bets are off. So I think there's just I would probably just be slightly concerned that they, because of it's really, there's a lot of understanding to have behind this to understand it, that someone could say, well, you promised me.
Yeah,
but it wouldn't go up. So
employers are making a risk judgment as well in this, and I think there's a need for employers to understand not just the likelihood of success, but also what's the downside risk, and how are they going to be able to manage that? And that what they might be saying is, okay, Joe, rather than taking a 60% reduction in my primary rate, in order to minimize the downside risk, because of where my financial position is, I might only want to take 4%. I know, Michelle. I'll take every
I'm
penny.
literally waiting to jump in here. I was wondering. And I suppose there is that. Given the financial situation that we're on, we can't afford not to
No.
take it. If somebody said to you, you don't need to pay this.
Yeah,
The option of choosing to pay it when you don't need to, when an actuary has told you you don't need to, is prudency beyond
yes.
acceptability. I think is probably the thing I would say. Joe and I have talked about, is there some mitigations we can put in so we don't just get a surprise in 3 years' time?
Yeah.
And there is some stuff we could do. We talked about, if there is stepping, but then again, that's choosing not to take something that you can take when you're in a financial bind, which is challenging, especially when you're putting council tax up and things like that. So, but we've said about, can we look at the funding value, do some work at the end of each year? So at least if at the end of year one, we think, well, actually,
So
there's stuff happening
you've
at
got
year one. So we can say, look, maybe we can, make some provision in our budget assumptions around, we think the rates are going to go up.
And that's something we can do with all of the employers, with the modelling tools that we have.
Yes.
For the system. But I think the other thing to remember is, so just because we have a high funding level doesn't necessarily mean that the primary rate isn't going to go up because of, say, inflation. So it's understanding all those interdependencies, and I think it's something that's really difficult to simplify.
Yes.
Without that crystal ball ability.
No, and which none of us have.
No.
I do think there's stuff that we can do in the interim.
Oh, absolutely,
to try and help us assess and plan for any change that might come with the next review.
I had one other more practical question, which is probably much more in the remit of the board than the previous one, which was about what's your view on the quality and timeliness of the data you received?
Yeah, the data that we get from West Yorkshire we find to be very high quality, at least compared to the other funds that we advise. Hardly any problems at all, as they're feeling.
And always on time as well. We discuss in advance with the fund, and we have West Yorkshire on the calls, and we plan for this a year in advance for when we're going to receive the data. And we do for the last, we've only been involved in the last 2 valuations, but both valuations we've received the data when we've been promised the data. So yeah, compared to some of our other funds, definitely.
The other thing to add that we do with that, just for a broader picture, is they'll provide us with a data quality report after all this at an employer level. So we then actually look at that and then identify employers that perhaps the PFR team, the employer relationship team at West Yorkshire can go and spend some time with, do some data audits and look at the quality there. So we're not just assuming that, well, they've said it's okay, we'll leave it. We do additional work to ensure that that quality remains good and try and improve it at each one.
And the valuation last year, we brought some high level messages from that data quality report to the board. And then, we were in touch with those poor performing employers to help them to improve their performance.
I mean, in the rare cases where there is like data missing, we will tend to make a prudent estimate to fill in the gaps. So I guess that's benefits the employer to have clean data, because otherwise you're paying a bit more because we're
The actuary is always going to be more prudent than anything else, as you should be. Anything else? We content. That was not asked to any decisions. So thank you very much. That's the last item on the agenda for this meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. The next meeting is the 20-something of January.
It's 22nd.
Yes, 22nd of January. Have a good Christmas and New Year. I drove when I went to the station with my wife this morning. I saw a Christmas tree in someone's window. They were clearly winding people up.
That's no time they put one up in Birmingham.
Yes.